We want to talk about the roadmap to advancing equity in Nigerian politics. The statistics are not nice. We believe in a society where women and men are given equal opportunities and equal rights. And with the last elections, out of the 423 legislative seats declared by the electoral body after the February 25th presidential and national assembly polls, men hold about 408 seats, representing about 96.5%, while only 15 are held by women, which represents only 3.5%, a very, very infinitesimal figure. Additionally, of the elected legislators, men hold about 98 out of 109 Senate seats and 325 out of the 360 House of Representatives seats, won by 7 and 8 parties respectively. Also, women hold only 2 seats in the Senate and 13 seats in the House of Representatives. Now, that is not a very encouraging figure, and we want to sort of see how we can move these statistics up, hopefully in the next election. Joining me right now, I have with me the founder and CEO elect her, Ibijoke Faborede. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Iro. Thank you so much.
So, the statistics are not looking pretty. How do you feel about that?
Honestly, I think it's not a great time to be a woman in Nigeria. I kind of feel, I mean, a lot of people are obviously very disappointed, at the patterns that we keep seeing. And also just because it's not very clear that women's issues are not on the top burner. But, we've seen some incremental change. We've seen a lot of non-conventional people. We've seen a lot of private sector stakeholders, be more interested in this space. So we do hope that we're going to see a lot of positives going forward. While we do not have the numbers that we want in the National Assembly and State Assembly, we believe that, this is the time to negotiate power for women to ensure that we can hold the president-elect to his manifesto, which is ensuring that, it keeps to the 35% required recommendations on women's representation in the national gender policy. And I think that's the next step. So I like to be very pragmatic. The numbers are not looking good, but for me, it's where do we go from here? I don't want to sulk because I'm not happy about it, but the truth is that time is going. Women are not waiting. Women comprise over half of the population. Women control over 40% of, microeconomic businesses in Nigeria. So we can't just wait. What we need to take is the silver lining from this and then negotiate power from there upwards, yeah.
Okay, I like the fact you said negotiate power, 35% according to the president-elect. Now, this percentage zoning is something that you would find not just in the political parties, but across space. We have political parties saying, okay, if you're getting a form as a woman, we're going to give you a discount, sometimes free forms and all of that. And after all of the percentages allotted, you now see that men still go ahead to occupy those positions that the political parties have said we're going to zone this particular percentage to. How do you think you can truly negotiate this power?
I think, first of all, it's important to establish that there's a lot of tokenistic approach going on, whether the executive, the legislative, or, just simply at the party level. We haven't gotten to a place where we understand the importance of equity in Nigeria. And I always tell people this, my job as the founder of Electa, on this mission really is to help people understand that there are socioeconomic implications when you exclude a certain demography in any economy, which means that you can have balanced decisions, you can have balanced policy outcomes, you can have balanced economic outcomes, and that essentially affects everyone. And so that's what I do when I speak with people, saying, look, this is not about women. And so let's get to the table. If we're talking about, a shift in the socioeconomic outlook of Nigeria, if we're talking about, improving our microeconomy and our macroeconomy, if we're talking about alleviating poverty, if we're talking about just having a proper economic agenda and getting Nigeria out of this mess or the retrogression that we're experiencing, then we need to ensure that all of society is reflected in decision-making and policy outlook. And I think for me, That's where this comes to play. Now, how do we negotiate power for women? So my organization, Electa, we are releasing a roadmap, and we call it a roadmap because it's supposed to be a guide. We had to do a lot of reflective thinking and a lot of deep research, evidence-based research, going into election, and of course, from the outlook of the election, saying, where do we go from here? What do we need to do? But we understand that, every politician comes to office, they have their self-agenda, they have the party agenda, they want to look good, you understand? And they have just 4 years. And so we need to go from the non-conventional, the conventional way of thinking to the non-conventional way of thinking, saying, how do we meet them halfway? How do we create incentives? How do we make this a top agenda for the politicians who are here to who really have a short window to make an impact or to look good. And so what we've done with this document is a three-pronged approach, which is short-term, immediate over the next fiscal year, medium term, which is 2 to 3 years, and then longer term, which is 4 to 5 years. And what we've done is, what are the quick wins? What are the quick wins that we can bring to play for those politicians, but for women as well? Because again, we must understand that politics is a game of negotiation. And I like to run a very pragmatic organization. I don't like the numbers, I don't like the outlook. And there's some things, unfortunately, that we need to compromise on and negotiate so that we can get women, because we cannot fix the system from the outside. It's so important that we get in there to really project the changes that we want. So some of the short-term recommendations include, getting women on the transition committees of the new administration, both at the presidential level and at the governor-select level, ensuring that we as an organization, and bring it together all the players in the space from the private and public sector to carefully craft and identify female technocrats intergenerationally that can be part of the administration. So we're currently putting a list together, profiling them, so that when you go and lobby, you're going with something. Right. I think the world has evolved past, let's do this, women was we know. Again, is what are we asking? What do we want? What are we bringing? So I believe that, if you don't give me a seat at the table, I will bring my chair and bring 1,000 more chairs with it. And that's what we're trying to do with this. So from the short to the medium to the long term. Longer term, medium term has to do with reintroducing the reception bill, but bringing in men as allies, bringing in men to really do a postmortem on that bill. I mean, partnering with current legislators, of course, and saying, look, what were the main issues? Why was this rejected? What needs to change? And this takes me to a conversation I had with President Banda during the election. And she said, look, as a woman that's been in politics for so long, I've learned the art of negotiation and compromise. There was a bill where they were trying to get more women elected in Malawi as well before, when she was government. And she realized that it was just one language and the men had a problem. So they had to make sure it was a universal language to ensure that it was more about gender. So that if at any point men are excluded, they can also benefit from that as well. And that was how she got the buy-in from it. And I think we're also learning from what is happening in these other climes as well, saying, okay, we know that this is a very good agenda. The reception bill was very clear. We want to get women, elected, but the reality is it was woefully rejected on the floor of the National Assembly. So where do we go from here? And I think these are some of the very practical things we're trying to do. Also ensuring that there's now a better synergy between the private and public sector, because a lot of private sector players are apolitical. But, Nigeria runs a very strong political economy. You can't separate politics from the economy, because the legislators and the National Assembly are the ones that drive policy that promotes ease of doing business, that promotes the business outlook. So at the end of the day, if they are not involved as stakeholders, as custodians, not necessarily to get partisan, we're going to keep seeing those gaps. But also, when you look at the consuming population, even the private sector needs to look at that. Women, when it comes to their income, so the economic analyses are there. And I think that for us, is what we're trying to do with this roadmap is to say, look, this women's issue is everyone's issues. This is about Nigeria's survival. So where do we go from here? In the short term, what can we do? How can we hold ourselves accountable? How can we ensure that any government that's been legally certified to be in power, how do we work with them without being partisan to say, look, this is something you can leverage on. This is something that you can pin into the agenda. This is something that you can get quick wins for. And I think that benefits all of society, at large. So that's essentially what we're trying to do with this report.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, there's something that bothers me. I mean, traditionally, you'd see that Africa, Nigeria, has been a very patriarchal society. Men are being seen as the more natural-born leaders. But if we look at it intrinsically, we've seen that our mothers in our homes have played the leadership position and women really run the homes, right? And you've seen a lot of entrepreneurial mothers, people that go out of their comfort zone to actually take care of the entire family. And I know I don't just speak for myself, I speak for a lot of people who have seen women, you know, display this leadership in several spheres and in several definitions. Now, how do you think we can change the conversation to, okay, women are not necessarily looked upon as natural-born leaders, to moving the conversation to, yes, my mother, you know, even when things were bad, went out of her way to make sure that the entire family feeds. So I should see my mother as a natural-born leader. So how do you think we can sort of have this orientation, you know, in this patriarchal society, so that eventually when we see a woman on the ballot box, we don't think, oh, she's a woman first. We think, oh, she's competent.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a question that I often ponder about, but it's one I'm very excited about as well. And I'll tell you why. There's an interesting project we're working about, which is just about changing the historical narration of women, because you know that oral transmission sometimes can play great danger, because from one custodian to the other, some things tend to get lost in translation. Historical oversights have played such a detrimental factor to this particular case. You know, even women in the past, we had a lot of strong women pre-independence that played very pivotal role in the socioeconomic development of pre-independent Nigeria, but also after independence as well. And you know, most times they're often omitted, or their stories are not even told in the positive light. Now, there's something you call social conditioning, and that happens to a lot of people. If you put a lot of, you know, people in the room, young people in the room, let's even talk about, you know, people like young cousins, young nieces, and you ask them, you know, who do you see as a leader? Most of them wouldn't really point to a lady, and that's what you call stereotyping and social conditioning. So there's a lot that needs to change. There's a lot of mindset reorientation. There's a continuous education that we need to really ensure that every stakeholder prioritizes. But one thing I also want to say is that for my generation, for people like you and I, there's a pattern, and the pattern is the pattern of the lack of resilience. And I say that because sometimes we start issues, but we don't push it to the last mile. That's why you see a lot of impunity in the system. Politicians understand that. They just say, okay, let them shout, they calm down later. We need to be a population, you know, where, because of our lived experiences, we're essentially constantly demanding for what we want, and regardless of, you know, the emotional attachment or the sentimental attachment to issues, we ensure that we always get a seat at a table. Now, for me, I feel like the way to shift the narrative and move, you know, the conversation of women being just natural leaders to actually being, you know, to share the lived experiences of women, you know, based on our individual stories, is to ensure that number one is we're part of governance, to ensure that behavioral change communication is something that becomes you know, an everyday thing. To ensure that even at the basic education level, we begin to start reorientating people. There's something one of my professors says, and that's the most detrimental form of poverty in Nigeria is mindset poverty that can destroy and even the most learned population. So we must get to a place where we start reorientation. And I think that, you know, the entertainment industry has such a very pivotal role to play, because the power of storytelling is one that transcends generation, is one that mirrors the lived experiences of people. And that's why, you know, for me, the work that we, for example, do within our arts and special projects, where we use fashion, storytelling, film, drama to really reorientate people, is very pivotal. And I think it's what I'm going to encourage people to do more. Also, using non-conventional approach is very important as well. And so for me, I also think we need to get to a place where we're not forcing people to understand the role of women in society. I think it's a loss for everyone, essentially. And I think that sometimes society needs to hit rock bottom before they have that reality check. And I think we have it right now because the economy is a mess. But also some instrumental timelines, I've played out in the past 3-4 years. We've seen the NSAS protest, and we saw the very pivotal role that women played as the infrastructure to back that campaign with resources and with just innovation, innovative methods. And today we're very thankful to the ladies of the Feminist Coalition. Second of all is COVID around the world. You saw women take very human-centric approach to governance as opposed to taking very capitalistic approach to governance. And I think that has been very instrumental. So there's a lot that we can definitely play on. And I think that eventually that's really going to shift it. But there's an incremental change.
Thank you.
I don't like to be pessimistic. I like to pick the silver lining and run with it. I also think that there's a lot at stake. One thing I like about the current political environment is even though it's very gloomy, and you mentioned something that Nigeria needs healing, there is a lot to take from this. The dynamics have shifted. There is a paradigm shift that we need to ride on. And I think that it's the best time for us to negotiate for women because, number one, women are one of the most powerful voting blocs in this country. So 100%. We need essentially to start negotiating power for women. Yeah.
We're out of time. We're out of time. But thank you so much for coming. And definitely, there are lots of stereotypes that needs to be changed. And for you watching it, please, anytime you're driving and you see somebody not driving well, and then you look at the person and the driver is a woman, please don't go, now woman. No. That's not nice. Right, that's not nice. Thank you very much for coming to the program. We appreciate you. Rubbin Minds continues after this break.